So the second somebody comes and shatters their fantasy and humbles their pride, they're going to resist that and want to go find the in-group of people that will support their fantasy.
Hi everyone, my name's Corey from the Corey Batwell podcast. If you want to find out any more of the stuff that I do, please check out my Instagram linked below. So in this podcast episode, we are so blessed to have on Dr. John Demartini. And if you've ever really wanted to unlock your full potential, become the best version of yourself, and really, if you've ever been in a position where you just know you need to be better, but you don't know what to do to get there, this podcast is it. It is so fantastic. It is so good. We get to so much epic detail. I'm just so blessed to have Dr. Demartini onto the show today. So if you guys get anything from this podcast, please hit that subscribe button on YouTube. That would mean the absolute world to me. And we will see you on the inside. I hope you guys enjoy this one. I would definitely get ready, strap yourself in, because it's insane. So see you guys on the inside. Dr. John Demartini, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I'd love to know, what have you been working on recently, or what have you been learning recently, which has been, really impactful or important to you?
Oh, I'm kind of a guy that loves to study all kinds of things, and it's varying. I mean, I get asked to do, like I have I've been asked today on a podcast on the Ukrainian war issue, so I'm obviously studying that. I had this professor from Yale. I'm doing it on studying neurology, having discussions on neurology. Somebody asked me to talk about Egyptian mythology, which I had background in. That is something I was reviewing. Quantum theory, and I study and write a lot on the fields of quantum physics and quantum theory. So it varies every day. And it could be physiology, it could be psychology, it could be health areas. Sometimes I get consults that are health issues, and we have to try to figure out and diagnose it and figure it out. Every day is a different day. So I'm constantly learning about a lot of different fields.
What's been the most interesting to you?
This professor is he has a doctorate in law and doctorate in political science and political philosophy. And so having discussions with him on, I have background also in philosophy and also political philosophy. And so we're having discussions about, the Ukrainian war and what's really going on, not what the media is saying, but what's going on behind the scenes. We're having discussions about the evolution of that area, and looking at the movements of all the borders on that area over the last 1,000 years, and looking at the trajectory of where that's going, and the needs and the resources of the lands and all kind of other reasons besides what we hear about on the news. So so that's been pretty invigorating to navigate through the history of that region and taking a look at what's going on and other motives and historical ideologies that are playing out right now. And of course, a challenge for resources too. That's always a factor in wars.
Well, what is it? What contributed? What are some of the other things that you guys have been like, ooh, I figured this out?
Well, there was an ideology difference between Stalin and Lenin. And one was interested in union of Russia, and the other one was interested in a federation, a breakdown of individual parts. And so because of that, Putin slanted on one side, and it had gone in the other direction. And at one time, Germany came in and raided Russia, and 20 to 40 million people were slaughtered. So Putin doesn't like the idea of having people on the border that could come in and invade him, particularly if it's all part of NATO, because those are not necessarily in line with his ideologies. So he's trying to protect his borders. And so they'll see him, people say, well, he's, this evil villain on CNN or whatever. But if you come in from a different perspective, he's also just trying to stabilize his country, to keep it from being completely vulnerable. And so there's two sides of the story. Whenever you see a story and it's highly polarized to one side and good and evil, you can always guarantee the other side of the story is being overlooked. there's other factors. So, and there's also a vast amount of resources. I mean, Ukraine is a very resource-rich location for many resources. So there's factors there that are playing out. And there's also political factors, and there's also US political factors that are going to surface. I assure you they're going to surface, which will add another twist to it as the months come on. So I try to look at it. I don't come from an idea that this is good or bad. Because if you look over the last 1,000 years, over the fluctuation of the borders and just that whole European and, that region, North European area, you're going to see in Russia and all those areas a massive movement of country changes. And we don't see that. We just assume this is the border, that's the way it is. And we think, in short little time frames. But if you look over 1,000 years, you will see a constantly movement. If you go online and look at 1,000-year history of that region, you'll see it. And it literally shows you all the wars and all the things that go on. And so when you put it in context like that, it changes. And if you look at the ultimate motives at the time, it has a different meaning. And the sensations of each country are different. I mean, I'm watching news in different countries right now, and they're all different. They're not all the same story, and because it applies to their country differently. And so we're used to the propaganda of our own country and believe that stuff. And that's not but a tiny little, single opinion of what goes down. So I'm watching it, and I'm taking political philosophy and theories of human behavior, like the law of the one to many, and the pairs of opposites, and support and challenge, and the ratio of androgyny that underlies all countries and organizations and individuals, and just imposing on it. And it's just following certain laws. It's predictable. It's a lot of predictability to what's happening.
Yeah, and I think it's insane, the whole predictability thing. Because one thing when I went through your book, The Breakthrough Experience, was just how much of the hero's journey was weaved throughout it. And I thought that was so beautiful to see in regards to this as like for the individual. So I just love to know like your experience and your insights on how like the hero's journey and mythology and philosophy have sort of influenced how you would give, encouragements and motivate individuals.
Well, when I think of the hero's journey, I go back about 35 years to Joseph Campbell, when he wrote The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and Bill Moyer in that interview series that he did way back then.
Oh, that was an interview series? I should write this down.
Yeah, there was a whole series done by Bill Moyer on him. And so if you have a chance to see that, it's a beautiful series. It's a discussion on mythologies through time. And I also think of Ernest Becker. Ernest Becker was a Pulitzer Prize winning writer who wrote on a book called The Denial of Death. And he was discussing how human beings, individually and collectively, in order to deal with the finiteness of their life, they deal with the idea of mortality by two different options, he called it. One option was the collective heroism and immortality path, and the other one was the individual hero and individual immortality path. He said the majority of people will fit into society and be part of the herd and the community, you might say, for fear of rejection, and they'll conform. And there's a great little video online called Conformity that applies to his book. It's worth reading, watching. I mean, it's about 20 minutes. And he goes and explains why people conform and why they fit in out of the fear of rejection and the fear of banishment and this kind of thing. And that's why most people will follow not the individual hero's path, but the collective hero's path. That means they'll be good and try to be pious inside a group and fit in. And that's not where innovation occurs. That's not where revolutions occur. That's not where the next level of productivity or creativity come. It's the individual path who makes the difference, the unborrowed visionary, the individual that is willing to walk and live congruently with what they value most, instead of just subordinate into a deontological duty state. They're living by design instead of duty. And they're willing to be ridiculed, violently opposed until their self-evident ideas make a revolutionary change and set the new standard. And there are very few that are willing to do that. And I've been studying, as you know, human value systems and what drives human beings I've been teaching 50 years this year. And one thing that I feel certain about is that when every human being has a set of priorities, a set of values that they live their life by, and when they're living congruently by what they value most, the highest values, they're living by highest priority, they wake up the individual hero journey. And when they are living by lower values and subordinating to the herd and giving up their individuality to fit in, they're living by lower values. One awakens the executive center and they have self-governance. The other one awakens the desire amygdala center and they have no governance. And one is governed from within, the leader, and the others are governed from without. One lives intrinsically, the other lives extrinsically. And so the extrinsic people are living with fear of banishment and fear of rejection, and so they fit in. And they're in a causal world, what the Buddhists would call the karma world. They live in causality. So this caused me to feel good or bad, and therefore this solution is outside me. So the cause of all my problems is outside of me, the scapegoat, the devil, and the solution out there, the savior, is all outside. Instead of the integration of the hero and the villain inside themselves, and the integration of the angel and demon inside themselves, and walk the path of an integrated objective mission, and building incremental momentum towards something, revolutionary and transformational, and something that contributes and causes a people to stop and look and first ridicule, but eventually go, wow, you had the courage to do it. It's kind of like a Elon Musk say, let's go to Mars. People go, what? Yeah, we're going to Mars. He's about to launch his craft and test craft it very shortly in the next few days here. So the idea that of an individual hero is the authentic hero. And this is what Ernest Becker was saying. The authentic path of living congruently by what you value most and giving yourself permission to do that is so few people are willing to do that. But those that do, they make history.
Oh, they do. I actually had goosebumps while you were saying that. I just couldn't agree anymore. I'd love to know your journey with that and how you sort of started from figuring out those things, understanding that you're on your own individual journey, and how you took the necessary steps to move forward.
Well, I was born with left-handed, which was the the oddball of the way they started out. They were sinister in those days. You weren't allowed to be left-handed. You wore a brace on your left hand to make sure you developed right-handedness. That's how crazy it was. But that didn't work with me. And so I guess I was a misfit all the way from the beginning, and a bit odd. And I was a street kid as a teenager. I left home when I was 13, and street kid. So I didn't get the formal education like everybody else. And I think that added to another dimension. And then I started to open my eyes and see that there's a lot of moral hypocrisy in the world, a lot of hypocritical kind of behavior. So I was on a path of how do you sift through that and find something that's objective and true, instead of just get bombarded by a bunch of subjective biases and ideals that nobody lives by. And so that led me down a path of studying and reading and learning. And I studied comparative religion. I studied 3,000 different religions and comparative philosophy, more than 3,000 philosophers. I studied ideologies, 400 textbooks on morality. I mean, I've been going down that path for a long time, and studying physiology and psychology, neurology, as many things as I get my disciplines on. There are 300 disciplines now. And I guess I'm a polymath in that respect. So I found a lot of stuff. Paul Dirac wrote a book called The Principles of Quantum Mechanics in 1947. And in there, he basically stated, it's not that we're not taught, it's not that we don't know so much, it's we know so much that isn't so. And so I want to know what was so instead of what wasn't so. And that led me to being kind of a renegade guy that was challenging some of the paradigms at the time. And one of the biggest ones was the positive thinking mentality, right? And you're supposed to be nice, never mean. You're supposed to be kind, never cruel. You're supposed to be up, never down, positive, never negative, peaceful, never wrathful. And frankly, I've never seen anybody that do that. I've seen people put on the facade that they do that publicly, but I mean, even Gandhi, when I went and studied his memoirs, I read everything that he had ever personally written. I found out that he was violent, he was aggressive, and he was hanging out with young girls and doing all kinds of stuff. And he was definitely had another side to him. Same thing for Mother Teresa. I found a whole other side of Mother Teresa. In fact, I had two ladies that actually spent 3 to 6 months a year with her, and they told stories that would just blow your mind.
No way.
And they were in our mastermind. And I found out that everybody's got two sides. And it's just a matter of when that other side's going to be exposed, if it's being hidden. You know, that's what the tabloids do today. They bring out all that stuff, so you get to find out. Nobody hides this. You can't hide stuff as easily today because people got snapshots everywhere. You know, they can catch you in your stuff pretty quick. So now we're getting to see that hypocrisy pretty good. And I don't even try to be a nice person. And people go, what? I'm not a nice person. I'm not a mean person. I'm a human being with a set of values. If you communicate in my values, I can be nice as a pussycat. You challenge my values, I can be mean as a tiger. And that's what I find out there. Human beings have these pairs of opposites. So I gave up this fantasy of trying to get rid of half of myself to love myself. And I don't try to teach that crap to people, because what it does is just sets people up in a bipolar condition, trying to get rid of half their life and try to get only one side. And the Buddha said it something really nicely. He said, the desire for that which is unobtainable and the desire to avoid that which is unavoidable is the source of human suffering. And that's why people are disenchanted with their lives and frustrated. And one of the biggest drugs is, for depression, because people are expecting life to be a fantasy instead of embracing the two sides of life. And the same thing in relationship. You expect people to be one-sided. You're never going to love somebody if you're trying to get rid of half of them. And you're not going to love yourself if you're trying to get rid of half of yourself. So I don't waste my time on that. And boy, but try to tell that to the world. They want the fantasy. They want the dopamine fix. The amygdala, which is the dopamine center, you might say, is avoiding pain, seeking pleasure, avoiding predator, seeking prey, avoiding negative, seeking positive. And so that center, which is a survival center, is what drives this fantasy and what sells and why people buy that stuff, that opium, as Karl Marx said. And so I'm not interested. I'm interested in more of a stoic objectivity and see both sides and embrace both sides, because that's what a true objective is. And that's what the executive function of the brain does, which self-governs and allows you to path of mastery. That's the individual hero. So the individual hero is never going to be an individual hero if they're looking for pleasure without pain, looking for praise, not ridicule, because the more you try to addict yourself to pleasure and praise, the more criticism is going to hurt, because you're frightened, you're trying to avoid it. And that which is trying to be avoided that you can't avoid is a waste of time. So I'm kind of I'm not into positive thinking. I'm not into, fantasy promotion. I'm in that makes, I don't sell as easy. I'm not as popular, but that's not what the mission is. The mission is to gather information that will stand the test of time and allow people to master their lives and disseminate that. But I've been blessed to do that this is my 50th year.
Yeah, well, congratulations for that. Celebrate that for sure. And is that why you think, on that topic, is why Nietzsche was so adamant on people becoming who they are and overcoming themselves?
I think all great minds knew that. They had their own way of saying it. Nietzsche was certainly capable of articulating that, because he was quite articulate. But I think there's been many great minds that have mentioned that. There's been some that are delusional, that you're supposed to fit in and the good life is the pleasure life. But consequentialism kind of proves that erroneous, because it was a great little argument about this. Jeremy Bentham was the one promoting kind of this utilitarian consequentialism that's trying to say that the more happiness for everybody, the greater the values to people. And then somebody came along with a satire on it, kind of like Voltaire did with Leibniz's, Candide, and said, well, if everybody, the greatest happiness is the greatest thing, then if a person is happy, then they're contributing to the overall happiness quotient. But if somebody's not, they're holding it back, and that's not great for the whole. So shall we eliminate them? If they're not happy, should we just get rid of them, kill them, because they're lowering the happiness quotient in society? And it was a satire on how ridiculous some of that was, And it was really quite funny. And nobody really knows the consequence of anybody's action anyway. We can just artificially narrow our mind down and claim that that's a cause of something. It's more correlative than causal, but it's murky on the causal world. And we go through and we create these ideas that this caused me pain, this caused me pleasure, but that's all extrinsically murky. Our perception of life is, we have control of our perception, decisions, and actions. And I'd much rather be accountable for my perception, decisions, and actions than do a blame and credit dissociation. And this is the false attribution biases to the external world instead of owning the accountabilities of your own dreams.
Yeah, one thing that related to me is I read The Birth of Tragedy with Nietzsche, and he talked about Dionysus and Apollo, how he was everyone in a world, as you're saying, were too positive thinking or trying to be very Apollo, noble people, but he's we got to embrace that Dionysus side of ourselves as well, which made so much sense to me as you're saying that.
The Bacchic orgies proved that was a bit of an ideal because they started to having the Bacchanalia every year to let loose for all those constraints that they artificially imposed.
So what is the Bacchanalia?
Well, that was the celebrations, the wine and the parties and celebrations, to balance out the temperance, people like Aristotle. So it was quite interesting. But it's the same as the governing center, the executive center in the forebrain, or the amygdala. And most people are run by their amygdala. They feel and think second. They feel first, think second, instead of think and then feel. I would say if you're letting your amygdala run you, you're probably going to be impulsive and instinctual all the time and be in survival mode. And your autonomics are going to be all over the place. And if you're living more executive, you're going to be self-governed and have some reason. And that takes the embracing of both sides of life to stabilize you. You can't be stable if you're looking for a one-sided life, like trying to get a one-sided magnet. If I gave you $1 billion cash to give me a one-sided magnet, a positive pole without a negative pole, if you're ignorant, you'll be searching for it, but you'll never find it. If you're wise, you'll understand the 4 partial differential equations of James Clerk Maxwell, and that's not even possible. But if you're not wise about that, you'll be searching for this pleasure, utopia. Utopia is a place that doesn't exist that people in fantasy search for.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, life gives you two sides. I mean, if the fatal attraction that Michael Douglas faced with Glenn Close in that movie years ago, he had this incredible passion. Passion comes from this impulsive behavior, right, of suffering, of wanting to get one side. And anything you infatuate with, you fear the loss of. Anything you resent, you fear the gain of. And so you're going to be living in this phobic environment, in this highly polarized perception, instead of seeing both sides. Wilhelm once said, when you simultaneously see both sides, you have governance. When you see only one side and sequentially see then the other side, you have volatility. And the individual that is able to have self-governance doesn't need to be governed from the outside. They're the leaders that govern from within. And so that's the path of the master. That's the individual hero. That's the one that leaves the mark in the world. Because innately, every human being is yearning to want to be authentic. I mean, think about it this way. If you infatuate with somebody and put them on a pedestal, you'll tend to inject their values in your life, try to live in their values, which will be futile. And the thing you infatuate with will be spontaneously evoking noise in the brain, and you'll be distracted, and they'll be occupying space and time in your mind because of this infatuation. We've all been infatuated and can't get somebody out of our mind. And if we resent somebody, we have the same thing in reverse. Now we're preoccupied by that thing we resent, and it's running our mind, and we're now looking down on it and puffing ourselves up. So when we look up at people, we minimize ourselves. When we look down on people, we exaggerate ourselves. And the minimized and exaggerated self is the inauthentic self. Those are the personas and masks we're wearing, covering up the authentic self. And so when we wear those masks, we don't have our power, because when we're looking down, we're too proud to admit what we see in them is inside us, but in fact, we own it. The truth is we have it. And when we're looking up, we're too humble to admit it. So we're basically too humble or too proud to be ourselves. And we're being run by the external world, and therefore we give credit or blame, and we're distracted, and we're not present. Instead of leveling the playing field and having equanimity and equity between ourselves and others, not putting people up or down, but put them in our heart. And now we're present, now we're poised, now we're purposeful, now we're patient, now we're in our executive function, and now we've got strategies to go and achieve. And we'll be able to appreciate that there's nothing to fear to lose. You don't fear the loss of the things you infatuate. You don't fear the gain of the things you resent. You're just present. And that's when you're productive. That's when you're actually making a contribution that's sustainable, that's in fair exchange with humanity.
Do you feel that
To me,
people,
that's the path that makes more sense.
yeah, for sure. I completely agree with that. Do you find that people find it a little bit scary to, start learning about themselves in that ways, and they don't really want to
Oh yeah.
look to figure those things
The,
out?
the amygdala, the amygdala is addicted to consumption, food, infatuation, fantasy, immediate gratification, and pride. So the second somebody comes and shatters their fantasy and humbles their pride, they're going to resist that and want to go find the in group of people that will support their fantasy. So yeah, I get that all the time. I'm called in some respects, one person described me as, let's see, hot sauce on an open wound with a twist of lemon. Another person called me the Howard Stern of personal development, Howard Stern of consciousness or something. I get all kind of interesting nicknames because I hold them accountable to their own perceptions to make them see both sides of things so they can be mindful. And that's uncomfortable to face that. And it's only uncomfortable till they actually get to the center. And then the profoundness of their authentic moment is way more powerful than the facade that they were addicted to. And so it's liberating, but it's frightening initially, but liberating at the final end. So I'm a firm believer that I will endure their rejection and ridicule and things. I always say, if you're not being crucified, you're probably not on purpose. That's part of the game. I mean, look at. There's a great video. I think it's what it's by Elon Musk. I don't ever give up. You've probably seen it. I don't ever give up. If you get a chance, he's being interviewed by somebody, I think, on 60 Minutes. And they were asking him, when you had 3 exploded rockets, 3 exploded in a row, costing billion. Do you ever get a point where you just want to hang it up and just say it's not working? And he looked at him and he says, no, I don't ever give up. It says, I'm on a mission. We're going to Mars. And the interviewer all of a sudden got a aha. Like, if you come from an idea that just because you've had 3 obstacles, stop, you're going to give up. I have a friend here that lives on the ship that I live on. And he found the biggest gold mine in history, the largest gold find in history ever found. And instead of giving up, 6 other people, I believe 6 other companies tried to drill in almost the exact same spots. But what he did, instead of using a certain distance between drills, he made them every 6 feet. And he did it again, 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 methodically through until he found the largest gold find. And then he paid off, and everybody else gave up, and everybody went for immediate fix, immediate gratification, and they missed it by 3 feet to the left and 20 foot deeper.
So how do you encourage people to get them to that level of equinox or commitment to their mission?
Well, I've been developing methods for that for all these years, for almost 50 years.
Yeah.
And one of the methods I call the Demartini Method. And what that entails is a series of very precise questions to ask yourself that you hold yourself accountable to answer, that dissolves the distractive, emotionally amygdala driving behavior. And it cleans it up. It takes all the subconscious stored baggage and dissolves it and turns it into superconscious fuel. And allows the executive center, we've demonstrated it literally activates the executive center and gives you back into control. And it is an accountability exercise. And I could go over some questions if you want. I'll outline some of them.
For sure, I'd love that.
Let's say somebody comes along and does something you dislike or despise or resent or something. and you're upset and you're angry and you had an unrealistic expectation for them to be only positive or them to live in your values. Those are the two most common delusions that people have. And you resent it. So I first asked the individual, so what specific trait, action, or inaction do you perceive this individual displaying or demonstrating that you dislike, despise, or hate, or withdraw from most? And narrow it down. And it can't be something that's hearsay from somebody else. It can't be some broad, vague generality label like abusive. That's too vague. What is the action that they did? It can't be how you felt, because that's your interpretation of it, not what they did. And we have to narrow it down to what exactly they did. Once we identify that, or a series of those, then we have them ask the next question. Now go to a moment where and when you perceive yourself displaying or demonstrating that same or similar trait, action, inaction, and identify where it was, when it was, to whom it was, and who perceived you that way. And hold yourself accountable to answer those, because those are episodic memory and imagination stimulating in the brain. That literally helps neuroplastically change the brain function. So we hold them accountable to that. And it's been shown, and it was even biblically stated, that you never see something in somebody else and react to it unless it's reminding you of something that you're proud or too humble to admit you have, that you have. And you're in a deflective awareness state instead of a reflective awareness where the seer, the seeing, and the seen is the same. So you go in there and identify where you did it, and you do it again and again and again and again until the quantity and quality of that behavior in yourself is equal to what you see in them. And that immediately calms down the pride or the shame, if it's something you despise or admire. And it levels the playing field and realize, well, who in hell am I to be judging this person? And that in itself starts to transform the perception, decisions, and actions that come out of it. Once we've done that and it's balanced, and there's a confirmation question to confirm that, we go to the next question. Go to a moment where and when you perceive this individual displaying or demonstrating that particular trait, action, or inaction. Okay, and get present with it. Because it's in the moment of the perception that the conscious and unconscious biases are split. And that's when you start the judgment. So go to that moment of perception. And at that moment of perception, identify, if you perceive it as something you resented, what are the upsides to you? How is it helping you fulfill what's highest on your value? How's it helping you spiritually? How's it helping you intellectually? How's it helping you in business? How's it helping you in your wealth building, your family, your social life, etc.? And at first they say, well, it's not. That's why I'm angry. I said, no, that's a moral hypocrisy. There is no such thing as something that's all bad or all good. Those are survival misperceptions. Because anything that occurs on the planet, it must serve or it would go extinct, because anything that doesn't serve eventually goes extinct. And it's still here. And you can even read it in the times of the Sumerians, and the same behavior was around. It hasn't gone away. So when you actually go in there and find out how it serves them, and they start stacking up the advantages and benefits of them to them, the judgment calms down, and all of a sudden they find out there's an upside to that thing that they thought was terrible. We've all had things that we thought were terrible in a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years later, we'd look back and, oh, thank God that occurred. Now, if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be where I am today. But why have the wisdom of the ages with the aging process? Why not have the wisdom of the ages without it, by looking right now for that, the benefit side? So I hold them accountable to balance the advantages with the disadvantages, because everything is neutral until we make a heaven or a hell out of it, as John, Milton said. And we have the capacity to do that. So what we do is we go in there and find out the other side, because it's not what happens to us, it's our perception of what happens to us that makes the difference. So we go in there and be accountable to find that out. And I've been doing this for years, decades, and I have yet to see something that the mortal body can experience that the mortal soul can't find the blessings to and turn into love. So I went in there, I hold people accountable to go find that. And they want to dodge it. They want to be right. Their addiction to being proud makes them want to hold on to their belief system. Their addiction to the fantasy makes them want to avoid the predator, and they're going to blame them as a predator, and they're going to be this innocent prey. That whole model is just childish. And so I hold them accountable and make them go and look. And when they do, they get tears of gratitude for the very behavior that they were frightened of and resented. And then they realize that this person is a teacher to their life, not a villain. It's somebody that's waking them up to a part of themselves they haven't loved and owned. And you only want to change people on the outside that represent a part of you haven't loved on the inside. And so when they do, they realize, wow, I'm not even angry at this person, and I'm doing the same thing. And I realized that the reason I was angry is because I had done that and I was feeling ashamed of it. And they were reminding me of my own shame, which then we go to the next question. Now go back to a moment when you displayed it with somebody. How did it benefit the people you displayed it to, or people perceiving it? To clear your own shame, because if you don't clear your own shame, another person is going to come along and push that button again with resentment, because they're going to keep doing it, because the universe is going to make sure you don't leave anything, escape anything that you're judging. It's going to teach you how to love it. Sooner or later, it's going to force you to do it, because everything is, you can't be authentic when you're judging. You can only be authentic when you're loving. And this was written about by Empedocles 2,560 years ago. So this is nothing new. So when we finally go in there and find out how what we've done serves other people, we realize that they brought to our awareness the parts that were buried inside, that were unconscious, that were covered up by our pride, that we're wounded by, that we're now ashamed of. And now the shame is gone. Because shame is an assumption that what you did in the past has caused more pain and pleasure, more loss than gain, more negative than positive, more disadvantage than advantage to some human being. And the truth is that's robbing them of accountability of their perception, thinking that you did that. And that just goes against everything that's been taught by most psychologists out there. They're in the victim model, right? Which is disempowering, which keeps them in therapy for the rest of their life. And therapist, as you know, spells the rapist. So that'll rape your life away. So I basically, I confront that. Then I go to the next question. Go to a moment where and when you perceive this individual displaying or demonstrating this trait that you despise, and identify where it was, when it was, the content, the context, and who they're doing it to. And it may be you. And then that moment, get really present, because in the moment of presence, in that perception, you have an unconscious awareness of information that you've blocked out, and it's there, and it's the other side. And that's when you all of a sudden discover when somebody's criticizing you, that's because you're addicted to praise, and you're holding on to in your mind in virtual reality of praise. And this person is pointing it out to break the addiction, because you don't grow in praise. You actually grow by the challenge sometimes. Maximum growth occurs at the border of the two, pairs of opposites. So what I do is I hold them accountable to see where the other side of the equation was, because the mind will never see a side of something without the other side being available. The moment you infatuate with something, you resent its opposite. The moment you resent something, you infatuate with the opposite. And they're both they're present in the moment of the perception, but people were overlooking of it with a bias. So that's a survival bias. So once we get past that, we get to an objective view and we get mindful of both sides. We realize that there was a magnificent order of why this was occurring in your life to teach you how to love and be authentic. And then we have one last question on this, the first 7 questions. If all of a sudden you were to go back to that moment when they did that, if they had done what you fantasized they should have done, hoped you had done, the way you wish they would have done, the fantasy about how you wish they'd have been, what have been the drawbacks? Because as long as you have the fantasy about how people are supposed to be, the one-sided fantasy that people are supposed to be nice and not mean, you're never going to appreciate people for who they are. And you're going to resent them because they're not matching your fantasy. And your dopamine addiction to the fantasy is causing your nightmare of a life. Depression is a comparison of your current reality to that fantasy. And so I basically go through, and that's 7 out of 80 questions. So you're talking about accountability. When you're done, there's nothing but tears of gratitude, a deep appreciation for yourself and them, an honoring of the order that's hidden inside the chaos that you think is your life, and allows you to realize that everything was on the way, not in the way. And that is very profoundly impactful on transforming and helping you master your life. So I love teaching that. I teach that in a program called the Breakthrough Experience. And I also do training, because I've got 7,000 people out there doing that work to people around the world now. You know, teachers and educators and people that are teaching that now. And it's profound. And it's just a complete difference in stay positive, be nice, all this hypocrisy. So I'm not interested in those fantasies. The fantasies are the sources of our nightmares. And the addiction to those unrealistic expectations is the source of our depressions. And our drugs companies love to sell the drugs to that.
Yep, that is, for everyone who's listening, the power of self-reflection and awareness, and how it can literally change your brain forever, which blows my mind. Ironically.
Well, every time you see simultaneous contrast and level the playing field and have equanimity of mind, the executive center gets myelinated, neurogenically grows new fibers, dendrites get new spines on it. You're empowering your forebrain. and you have self-governance and inspired vision and strategic planning and executing plans with spontaneous action. You want to live that way? That's how to live a masterful life. If not, and you run the story and dwell on it and listen to, have you talked to your therapist about how this person did this to me and I'm a victim and all that, all you're going to do is dramatize with a positive feedback loop, a dramatization of the amygdala. And you're going to end up being blaming and looking for some savior outside. And that's how you become a follower, because you brain offload decisions to other people when you don't have resourcefulness. Resourcefulness is actually bringing awareness to both sides and the real source of what was there.
Yeah. And as Joseph Campbell said, it takes, heroic effort to do those things. And I love that you said that. And I'm assuming that is obviously how you create good leaders.
Well, great leaders,
Great leaders.
Jim Collins says, good to great. Good is a moral issue. Great is a magnitude. And I'd much rather create a great leader than a good leader.
I'd love to hear
There's
a story.
difference.
Yeah, there is 100%. I 100% agree with that. Sorry for saying good, but I'd love to hear like an emotional or powerful story that you've gone through with someone where they have just gone through this and just shattered their heart. I'd love to hear a story if you've got one on the top of mind.
Well, there's tons of those, but the one that just popped in my head as you asked that was I had the opportunity in South Africa to meet with 5 Israeli leaders and 3 Palestinian leaders.
Wow.
And they had to meet in a mutual neutral place at the Michelangelo Hotel. And they're in a room, and one group doesn't like the other group, as you can imagine. And they think they're the villains. Each of the others think they're the other ones are the villains. And I come in the room, and you could put a knife in there and it would just sit there. It was so thick and dense. And we had a lady there. We were not allowed to film it. They didn't want any filming. They didn't want anything like that. But they had somebody from the television there doing notes and stuff. But they weren't allowed to do any filming. And what was interesting is the very first thing that happened when I walked in and I said, "Hi, I'm John Demartini." One of the Israeli leaders, a woman, put her hand up. She says, "Dr. Demartini, I have a question for you before we begin. Do you believe in absolute evil?" And I said, "Absolutely not." And she goes, "Well, I do." And then I said to her, because she had for 14 years, she's been trying to mediate this issue with the Palestinians. And there's a mediator there helping her. And I said, when she said that, "I do," I said, "Is that possible? Why for 14 years you have not accomplished any mediation?" Because if you see your opponent with absolute evil and you're perceiving yourself not absolute evil with them, you're not going to have anything there's no common ground to start from. And she just got quiet for a second. She goes, "Well, okay." And then I asked her, I put her on the spot and I asked her, what is a particular trait, action, inaction? What specific trait, action, inaction do you perceive to be absolute evil? And she said, intolerance. Now, it was very obvious that she was intolerant on the spot, but she couldn't see it. She's blind. She was completely non-reflective in that moment. And I said, intolerance. Okay, great. Write that down on your piece of paper on this form that I've got in front of you. She wrote it down there. Intolerance. I said, now everybody write down on the individuals that you're having a clash with, write down the specific trait, action, inactions that you despise most and put their name at the top. You can abbreviate it so that you don't have to know who they are, but write down a list of all those things that you despise about them, that you just think that you resent. And so they're writing all down, and there's a big list there. And I said, and intolerance is one you put on yours. You put that at the top to the woman. She did. I said, okay, I got a question for you. Now go to a moment where and when you perceive yourself displaying or demonstrating intolerance. And she immediately said, without even looking, without even trying to look, I pride myself in not being intolerant. I'm the most tolerant person you've ever met. Everybody knows I'm tolerant. Nobody would ever say I'm intolerant.
Oh, wow.
I would never be that way. And I went, okay, these are black and white. Anytime you see infinity over one and one over infinity, all or none perceptions, you know that's delusive and it's survival orientation. It's a survival response. That's what the brain does. It's called the subjective bias and false attribution bias structure. So in the process of doing that, I said, well, that's interesting because I certainly am. And I listed 50 of my intolerances. I'm intolerant at the airport sometimes if there's a delay. I'm intolerant of the flight attendants if they mess up on a meal. I'm intolerant of people at hotels. I'm intolerant with my kids. I'm intolerant with my girlfriend at times. And I started listing all my intolerances until I figured someone would overlap into hers, and they did. And she said, well, those kind of intolerances, yes, okay, I have some of those. I said, okay, so never wouldn't be exactly accurate with it. Well, no. Okay, so let's go and start listing your intolerances, and let's find out where they were, when they were, who they were to, and who perceived you that way. And we listed 39. Do it. And I had everybody do the same thing while they were on that list, on their top one, the number one thing they resented about the person in the room. And I made her do a 39. And when she hit 39, she got quiet. She got tears in her eyes. She was poised, and she owned it. See, she was too proud to own what she saw in somebody else and was defending it, which is an amygdala response of pride and a fantasy about who she was. And all of a sudden she owned it. And I said, now, do you perceive yourself equally as intolerant quantitatively and qualitatively? She goes, wow, that's humbling. I said, great. Because if you're cocky, you need humbling to become authentic. You can't get into your heart when you're cocky. You can't get in your heart when you're shamed, when you're arrogant, pride, or humble and shamed. You only get in your heart when you're being you. Because one's exaggeration of you, one's a minimization of you, as Aristotle would say. So then I asked her, I said, all right, now that we've got that owned, and by the way, anybody else get close to that? Yep. The energy's lightening up and there's quiet. And I said, now go to a moment where and when you actually perceive this individual displaying or demonstrating that trait. Nothing hearsay, but actually demonstrating you perceived it with your own senses. She goes, okay. And she's still a little bit cocky, but less. And I said, now, in that moment, and from that moment till now, how did that benefit your life? And immediately, without even looking, she said, it didn't. That's the problem. How did it benefit your life? Be accountable and answer the question. Don't dodge. How does it benefit your life? I can't see it. I don't know. I can't see it. Anytime somebody says, I don't know, I can't, and I'm not, that's a sign that they're not in their highest value. They're not, it's going against what they value in their life. So I said, I'm going to hold you accountable. You're going to be, daddy's going to hold your hand here. Look again. I made her look again and again, and she couldn't come up with it. And I said, all right, how long when did you first have this experience? She says, many years ago. I said, and how did it catalyze in you your career path? Oh, well, that it did. I said, aren't you a book author? Yes. And didn't you write a book about this individual? Yes, I did. And did you sell that? And did you get notoriety from that? And did you get to be a leader from that? Yes. Did you give him part of the royalties for being part of the story? I didn't. I said, and are you known and you've met amazing people in the world and leaders in the world and have millions of people that listen to and follow you? I do. If you had never had that experience happen with this gentleman, what was your life doing prior to that? I was raising a family of some kids. So if that never happened, what's the trajectory? What do you think? She says, well, I don't know. I have no proof, but yeah, I would probably not been catalyzed to do it. I said, did it make you go back and finish education and educate yourself further? She goes, it did. Did you get your doctorate degree as a result of that? I did. And did you ever think you would ever be a doctor prior to that? She goes, I fantasize about it, but I took action. I said, and did you get connections in your family and people around the world? Yes. And I started making a benefits. We started stacking them up. We hit 32 benefits. And tears came. And then I hit her with a left fielder, a punch. I said, are you really committed to mediating a conflict here? Or are you committed? Are you just dedicated to becoming known and famous? Because if you're using him and got a bunch of followers that are angry at him and you're using him as a way of getting your notoriety and fame, that's different objective than actually committing to mediate, because as long as you see him as absolute evil, you're not going to ever get anywhere. He says, well, I don't quite see that the same way now. I said, so are you committed to mediating it, or are you committed to being famous? Just curious. And she paused for a second. She goes, wow, you hit me with a left fielder. I didn't even remotely come to grips to that. And she says, wow, what I'm doing instead of mediating is I'm rallying around it and living in the fantasy that if he was to come over to my side and my ideology and belief system, then we would have peace. And I said, that's not how it works. That's a self-righteous projection of your values onto them and expecting them to live in your values, which is futile. Nobody can live in your values. You can communicate what you value in terms of their values so they can get what they want while you get what you want, but you can't get them to live in your values without having non-sustainability, and it will just clash again. And only in moments when they're infatuated with you, they'll attempt to do that, but that will never happen, particularly if they're resenting you. She goes, I've been doing that. And I said, so what is the benefit of him in your life? And she broke down in tears. I mean, broke down and messed up her makeup. And it was the first moment she could actually look at the guy. And she said, I really owe my life and my career and my achievements to this man. I can't believe I'm saying that. And I said, are you afraid of all of a sudden losing your followers if you were to tell the truth? She goes, I guess I have been. I've been more focused on getting popular than I have been on actually getting the job done. I said, it takes a wise person and a very, very authentic person to be able to state such a thing. I said, right now, I'm respecting you even more than when we started here, because you were living in a delusion when we started. She goes, I was. Anyway, she stopped and she says, I got to fix up my makeup. So we took a break, and I was relentless like a pit bull on their arms and legs, keeping them accountable. And when she went off to go to the restroom to get her makeup done, the man who she was talking about came up to me, and he said, Dr. Demartini, that was a very profound experience. That was like amazing. I'm not even angry at this lady right now. I see the humanity in this lady. I'm actually, I feel something just shifted. And I said, fantastic. He says, I could swear she was talking about me the whole time. I said, she was. She says, well, I was thinking the same thing about her when I started, but right now I see that we have more things in common than we ever imagined. And I can't believe we're having, my perspective in 3 hours is like completely different. I said, that's my job. The mediator came up to me and she says, you accomplish more in 3 hours than I've done in 14 years.
How did that make you feel?
We finished that day with a dialogue in a table discussing things completely different. But the next time I came to South Africa, she invited me on her radio show to Israeli followers around the world. And she went on and told the story and told how she humbled herself and took a risk and was dedicated to mediation. Now, you're going to have a whole bunch of responses, and there's some people that are going to respond and be guided by her to resolve the issue. Others are going to be polarized because they're victims of history, angry and bitter and stuff like that. And they're going to start their own little fraction of, I'm still angry because they're not ready to grow up. So it's interesting to see what the repercussions that are. But here's a lady that, as far as I was concerned, did an amazing job at finally having reflective awareness instead of deflective awareness. And so I love seeing that, and I get to work with that every week. And I've had people I had a lady that was attempted stabbing, attempted rape at the bottom of a stairwell. And she spent 5 years putting him in prison and spitting on him and a whole bunch of stuff. And I had her go through this whole process. When she got through, she realized that she was an overprotected child. She was protected sexually. I mean, a whole bunch of things. And she drew in this so-called predator to balance it out to help her grow up. And in the process of doing it, she went to the prison and had dialogues with him and learned my method and helped him reform his life. And we went on television with this, and they said Dr. Demartini and his rape victim, great PR, right? Because it sounded like it was me doing it. but it was a really amazing show that shocked the hell out of Australia, and it was talked about. But it was, how could she actually go and thank this individual for the transformational life? But she's now traveled the world. She's consulted with people. She is not afraid of any man on the planet now, because she tackles consulting with major business leaders that are males and just puts them in their place and holds them accountable and stuff like that. And she said, I would never have been able to do that if I hadn't had this experience. And so I would say it's not what happens to you, it's your perception, decisions, and actions from it. And you can be a victim of your history. You can be a master of your destiny. It's totally up to you. If you ask questions, the quality of your life is based on the quality of the questions you ask. If you ask questions that liberate yourself from those emotional baggages, you can free yourself of the bondage and set yourself free. And so I'm all about that. And that's not popular. And that's not the common herd. That's the path of the individual hero. So I got tons of those stories.
Dr. Demartini, I am so grateful that you are alive and doing all of these things. It's amazing. How do you feel? Like, seriously, how do you feel when you think about the gratitude and the stuff that, the impact that you're having with these people? Like, how does that make you feel?
Well, I get a lot of tears of gratitude daily. I have the largest collection of gratitude journal of anybody I've ever met. It's 33 volumes. 33 volumes. It's thousands of pages. Thousands. Some volumes are 900 pages. And it's a list of gratitudes every day of people. And I got thank you letters from people all over the world. So I have tremendous amount of gratitude. I mean, I get to do what I love doing every day and watch lives transform. So yes, it's a great gift to be able to walk the individual hero's path, if you will.
Yeah,
I'm a firm believer. And you know what, the greatest thing to do is to help other people do that. If you help other people get what they want to get in life, you get what you want to get in life. And I learned that from Zig Ziglar many years ago. And I'm grateful for that realization. So I think if you're not doing what you love every day and not tap dancing to work, as Buffett says, doing something that contributes and serves, and it's in sustainable fair exchange, you're missing out on some magnificence of your life.
Yeah, I got actually a little bit emotional while you were saying that, reflecting on myself, because I've been doing this work for a few years now. So I can relate somewhat, obviously not onto your level, but it's so overwhelming. So seriously, thank you for existing. Thank you for writing the books, putting this out there, coming onto the podcast. Where can people who are listening to this podcast best find you? Because you've got courses, books, everything. People
can come on to my website, drdemartini.com. They can do a value determination process to determine what's really important to their life and what their life really demonstrates. They can go on and see. There's just magazines, newspapers, podcasts, webinars. There's thousands of things on there. You can keep yourself busy studying and learning. There's a podcast, Dr. Demartini Show. And there's also the Breakthrough Experience. The Breakthrough Experience is my signature program. I've done it 1,144 times in 33 years. And it's where I get to help people do something extraordinary with their life. And so they can come on and check that out too, because that's an amazing, life-changing, catapulting trajectory changer.
Wow. And what I like to do is, and all this will be linked in the show notes below for everyone who's listening, what I like to do is, on the conversation that we have had, is to get you to challenge everyone who's listening to do one thing, either today or this week. Obviously, the logical answer would be to buy your book, do the Breakthrough Experience, or jump onto the website and do those things. But it's just something a little bit extra. What is one thing that you would like to challenge the listeners who are listening?
To be honest, every single day, ask yourself, what is the highest priority action I can do today that will allow me to serve the greatest number of people in the most efficient, effective manner with the resources you have access to? And then give yourself permission to live by that priority and shine, not shrink, and do something extraordinary, not ordinary. Because the magnificence of who you are as an authentic being is way more profound than any facades and fantasies that you might try to make yourself.
And that'll start you on the individual hero's path.
Yep.
That's beautiful. Dr. John, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.